I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher. Tonight's episode, Ain't That a Riot? Given all the madness going on right now, I felt that this would be the right time for me to talk about the time that we had a small riot in my city, my jurisdiction. As everyone else, I have opinions and comments and thoughts on our current issues, but trying to stay with the theme of my podcast, I'm going to do my best to address the issue from the perspective of just being the cops. The riot that I dealt with took place back when I was working our downtown as a walking beat cop. It followed a hot summer here in Phoenix, and working on Mill Avenue, we watched as the crowds grew larger and larger. We also watched as the crowds grew more aggressive, and we voiced our concerns to our supervisors that we felt something was going to give. The city had worked hard to improve our downtown area and make it more of a destination for our community and the surrounding area. And in a short period of time, it became kind of the go-to place for the weekends. The main street was closed on the weekend nights, and it just became essentially a street party atmosphere, which increased the capacity for people and more events and things that would just draw people in. Overall, I think it was a good idea. It brought revenue, it brought recognition, it brought a lot of positive press for our city. But as with everything involving large groups of people, it also brought problems, which in turn involved police and law enforcement. And who likes that when you're having fun? At that time, there were only 4 officers assigned full-time to Mill Avenue, me being one of them, and then that would be supplemented with off-duty cops depending on the day of the week and availability and special events that were going on. On this particular night, myself and my partner were working the southern end of the downtown area, in an area that was problematic for large crowds and fights. And it didn't take long before something started to develop off on one side of the street, so we ran over there to take care of the situation. The part of our issue that we had to deal with down there was that the crowds would learn that any time the cops ran to anything anywhere, there's a good chance if they followed, they're going to see a show. And they began to follow to watch what happened almost every time. It was a real pain, though there really wasn't much we could do about it. So if there was a fight or a stabbing or shots fired or something like that, you had to respond as quickly as possible. And then these additional crowds of people who wanted to see something, see the show, often would interfere, get in the way, and just add to the problem that we were trying to deal with. Well, as we got to this group of people, it was typical of what we dealt with down there, usually. There'd be 2 or more people fighting or getting ready to fight, and then there'd be a large crowd surrounding them watching. So the first thing you had to do is essentially shove your way through the crowd to get to the center, try to deal with the actual combatants or soon-to-be combatants. This in itself caused issues, as the crowd oftentimes thought that you were just someone else trying to shove through to get to the fight, which would cause them to turn, and sometimes we'd get pretty close to getting smacked ourselves just doing that. This also inadvertently jacked the crowd up that was surrounding that fight, as if they needed anything else more to aggravate them other than what was going on. You did your best to try to say who you were and tell people to move before you pushed them out of the way, but most of the time you just had to physically shove through people and shove them out of the way because they wouldn't move and they wouldn't get out of the way otherwise. So my partner and I start pushing our way through fairly close to in the beginning and making our way to the center of this issue. And there weren't too many people watching yet at that point, maybe like 2 to 3 deep, so it wasn't too bad. Well, we get a clear view of what's going on inside the circle, and it's fairly apparent that there are kind of 2 main combatants. So, as we'd done hundreds of times before, I went to one guy and my partner went to the other. In a situation like this, there's not a lot of time for diplomacy or things like that you'd prefer to use, as these people are actively trying to hurt each other or they're just about ready to start throwing blows. And then there's always the inadvertent issue of us getting hurt as well. So there's a couple choices that you could use at this point. Now keep in mind, this was before we had the tasers, which I think are very, very beneficial and helpful. Great application, great uses. So anyway, for us, the only real choice was that you either went hands-on or you pulled out your pepper spray and you sprayed these folks. If you haven't experienced pepper spray before, or the older variant mace, which I'm going way back on for that, you're not missing anything pleasant. And invariably, after all the training that you had to do before you could carry it, it sometimes didn't work as you'd like it to. You know, you'd go through training in the academy for it, you'd spray it at different things to see how effective it was at distances, and then you'd get it sprayed on your face so that you would also know what it felt like. And then once pepper spray or OC spray came along, that was kind of the latest, greatest. And it's definitely worse, or it's better, depending on which end of the nozzle you happen to be on. OC spray is derived from a pepper, so you kind of equate it to sticking your finger in a jar of hot peppers and then wiping your finger on your eyeball. Part of the reason for the OC spray is that it was derived from a plant. It was plant-based. It wasn't lab-produced. So from what I remember, it was supposedly less prone to causing any kind of lasting injury. I do know that it worked a lot better than mace, and I also knew that it worked really well on me, so I avoided it and rarely deployed it. Anyway, it seemed to be the case with either mace or OC. Whenever somebody used it, it always got on the cops more so than it did the people that we were fighting with or whoever we were trying to get it on. Often you'd get into what we used to call the polyester pile, meaning, you know, you're fighting with people on the ground wearing your polyester uniform, polyester pile. And during that pile, one of the cops would pull that spray out and try to spray the suspect, but again, it always seemed to get more on us than it did them. It almost got to the point where you would start to yell at a guy if he started pulling that can out to put it away, don't use it. Well, this night, as I said, my partner and I started to deal with these guys, and we just went hands-on with them, which is pretty much normal for us. For my guy, he hadn't really noticed me yet, and I kind of reached around and hooked both of his arms at the elbows and pulled him back behind him in a full Nelson, and then I pulled him down to the ground. And as you're doing this, of course, you're telling him, hey, I'm the cops. You need to stop fighting, things of that nature to try to keep them from now fighting against you or, you know, freaking out and thinking that somebody grabbed them from behind is going to do them harm. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just fight more. You just never know what's going to happen. In this situation, this guy calmed down pretty quick, and he listened when I was telling him, hey, man, just relax, and I'll ease up on, you know, pulling your arms back. And he said, okay, I'm cool, or, you know, something to that effect. I won't resist. I don't recall. So I started to ease up on the full Nelson hold that I had him in. And then before I could let go of him completely, I explained to him that, hey, you are under arrest and you're going to be going to jail. And I explained, like I do to everybody, hey, the less you resist and the easier you are with me, the easier this is going to go for you overall. He said, hey, I understand. And I told him that I'm going to let go one arm because I got to get the handcuffs out and put them on, but I still got a good tight grip on the other. And if you start to resist or you start to fight, then you're going to get shoved back down to the ground again. So I'm doing this, and my partner's arresting the other half, and the crowd is doing what it does. It gets agitated. They start screaming, yelling, you know, tell us to let him go, let him fight, F the police, just the usual garbage. Nothing that we haven't experienced numerous times before down there. We just know that the one thing is you have to get back up on your feet as quick as possible. Because the longer that you're knelt down on the ground, the easier it is for someone to come in and, you know, give you that sucker punch or throw something at you or similar forms of letting us know we don't like you. Now, they can still do that when you're standing up, but it always seemed to be much less likely to occur then. Given the circumstances, we had also called for some other units to come help based on the size of that crowd and the agitation that we saw right as we got to it. Just as we'd both gotten control over the guy that we were each dealing with, some of the other officers showed up and they started to deal with the crowd. Well, I get my guy handcuffed and stood up, and I start to lead him out of the crowd. And again, he's cooperative. He understands what's going on, and he kind of allows me to lead and guide him through the crowd. And as I said, the crowd's really getting going now. There's yelling at the police, and there's, little small shoving matches starting here and there between other people. God forbid you bump into somebody and you don't overreact. And then the other officers that are responding are having to engage with those people to try to keep things from just blowing up. In addition, one of our mounted units, or an officer on a horse, had also come over to help out with the crowd. Now, as I've discussed before, the mounted units are invaluable when dealing with unruly large crowds or mobs, similar to basically what we were dealing with right there. Man, they are people-moving machines. I don't care how big or nasty or tough you happen to be, you're not going to be able to stand your ground when a 12 or 1,400-pound horse pushes into you. A mounted officer or two were always assigned to the downtown on the weekends due to the crowds. So the mounted guy does what they do. He starts to separate the crowd from each other and tries to get them to disperse so that, we can avoid any further problems such as further fighting, assaults on us, whatever. In this case, though, it seemed to really have the reverse effect, and it just inflamed the crowd, and together with everything that had occurred up to that point, things just got worse and not better. Add to this the problem that the other looky-loos, the other sightseers that were on the main Dragon Mill, had obviously seen and heard what was going on, and of course they had to run over to see the show, and now they're starting to interject themselves in the problem as well. I'd worked myself away from the crowd with the guy that I had arrested by then. And keep in mind, once you have someone arrested and in your custody, it's your responsibility to do everything you can to keep them safe and not allow any injury to occur to them, whether by your moving them or getting them to walk somewhere or because of someone else's actions. And I always remember this part of this mess because when I look back now, it's kind of funny. This guy I arrested and I both seemed to be of the same mind that we needed to get out of there, and we were doing our best to move quickly. So as we're walking, we're both looking back and kind of watching things unfold, and things are looking really bad and, not getting any better. And at one point, he kind of turns to me and he says, "Did we start all that?" And I says, "Yeah, I think we did." And he tells me, he goes, "Let's just get the hell out of here. I don't want to be anywhere near this anymore." To which, of course, I agree, and we continue to get farther away and get away from it. And the way we were working things back then, we had a central area set up in the downtown area with some tables and paperwork and transport officers so that you would bring your arrested person to one of the tables, you'd sit down, and you'd knock out all your booking paperwork. And then the transport people would take, 2, 3, 4 of these people at a time to the jail. It was all meant to try to speed the process down there because we had such large crowds and we arrested quite a few people every night. So as I'm filling out the paperwork, the guy I arrested he's providing me information to do so and still real cooperative. I'm hearing a lot of radio traffic with regard to the fight and the crowd that we just walked away from. And things are still deteriorating and the crowd is growing larger. Not good. I did my best to complete the book and paperwork as quick as possible so that I could get back out and, help deal with this crowd. So I told this guy that I arrested, "Hey, good luck, and, hopefully I'll see you under better circumstances next time." He said the same, and he apologized for, whatever part he had to play in starting this big fight and this issue that, I was going to go run off to. And I always remember telling him, "Hey, I appreciate that because obviously we don't get a lot of apologies or thanks, especially from people that we arrest." Well, my partner finishes his book and paperwork at about the same time I did, and we both clear on the radio from our arrest so that we can go help with the problem, the crowd. And by now, this crowd had grown to a couple hundred people, and things are starting to get broken, and things are starting to fly through the air. It started with miscellaneous garbage and cans, but later came the addition of bottles, rocks, firecrackers, and the worst, probably the most dangerous, was they started to pull these red bricks out of the sidewalk, and they were chucking those things at us. So at this point, I can honestly say that we had entered into a place that I'd never been in my career and never had been since, a riot. In our case, we had seen this coming with regard to the crowds, the crimes that were being committed, the heat of the summer, and the fact that the police, we were just running ragged from start to end of every shift, well into the early morning. But It doesn't matter. At that time, we got to face what we're dealing with and hope that we could get it under control before someone was seriously hurt or worse. And as the case currently, there are a lot of people that are just kind of along for the ride, so to speak. And the few that were actually there to hurt anyone or really damage property are, they just make it so much worse for the bigger crowd that's, again, just kind of along for the ride. The problem is it's nearly impossible for the police to differentiate between these two groups when they're so intermingled. You can't see clearly what they're doing most of the time, which brings about the reason for the police to clear everyone from an area, not just the criminals. So let me say that again. In nearly every situation like this, the best solution is to clear everybody from an area, not just try to pick and choose who either has committed crimes or who you think is gonna commit a crime. This is what becomes so exasperating for law enforcement, is when people repeatedly tell us, I'm just watching, I'm not doing anything, I'm not one of the bad people, I'm a good person. And then they get mad. They get mad at us, and then this starts, I have a right to be here, which a lot of cases they do not if it's private property. This is America, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I just think, it's a naive attitude. They just don't know any better, and they don't understand the magnitude of what they're expecting from the police. I've talked before about how many lose-lose situations that cops get put into, and this is just another one. As the night progressed, we estimated that the group of people who were in the downtown area, after initially telling all these people to leave and making a pretty good effort, was maybe around, 800, 1,000. Now, putting this into context, this is nowhere near what law enforcement and community across the country are dealing with now, but there's a lot of similarities. There were acts of vandalism. Car windows were broken, cars were damaged, street signs and things that these vendors had on sidewalks were broken or stolen. Tons of fights, assaults, so many. In fact, we didn't get to most of them. The windows in a number of businesses along the main drag were shattered or broken. There was a police car that we were unable to get out of the area, and it, of course, got damaged. The windows were all broken. It had been jumped on in the hood, and, body parts were caved in and kicked in. And at one point, a large group attempted to flip it over, which was, again, another kind of a funny thing, watching these idiots trying to rally enough people to flip it. They didn't get it done. And nearly all of us had things thrown at us. Luckily, most of those things either didn't hit you, or if they did, they didn't cause serious injury. You try to watch the crowd, because most of the time the morons that were throwing the things were kind of in the middle or toward the back. They were never at the front. That way they wouldn't be visible to us. So with that in mind, you just watched over the top for that item to come launching out of the crowd towards you, and then you'd warn, whoever was nearby to watch out. There was a cat and mouse game of chasing crowds or problem children here and there, trying to either arrest them or just get them to leave. And as we'd chase them or try to catch them, they'd taunt us like children. And then we'd try to catch them, and they'd run and hide again and so forth, and it was just all so silly. And I didn't understand, why would you want to spend your time doing this anyway? I remember there are some sporadic gunshots here and there from a couple places throughout that period of a couple, 2-3 hours into the early morning. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that anybody actually got shot or was seriously injured. Thank God. There was a report of one young lady who had been caught in the running crowds and had fallen and been trampled. And she sustained some injury to her neck and her back, but I don't think it was anything too serious. And in the early parts of our riot, we spent much of our time kind of running in groups of 2 or 3 to try to put out the fires, so to speak, where groups were congregating, and then they'd, be starting to vandalize or fight or, pull those bricks out of the sidewalk or whatever we'd see. And we kind of hoped that we'd be able to quash it just doing that, as we'd done a couple other times in the past. But unfortunately, we realized that this was going to take much more than that, at which point supervision down there decided that this was going to be declared an unlawful assembly, which gives us the right to force people out of an area, and then we would deal with it accordingly. This meant grouping together in much larger numbers and beginning to force people out and or arrest them and away from the downtown area to prevent any more damage and or injury. So calls were sent out for help from basically anybody in the department that could respond, as well as we called the university police department nearby, and they sent us a bunch of bodies also. I remember there's a lot of pushing and shoving of people, mostly those who thought that it'd be okay to square up with you on a line or while you're trying to do your job, or someone who thought it was okay to try to hit you, or just people that were fighting amongst themselves. You know, you didn't have time. Normally, a lot of these people that you'd contact that way would probably end up going to jail too. But no, there's a lot of pushes and shoves and, just clear out of the way because I got to go do something more important. I remember there's a lot of OC spray that was used. And as always, you'd get a little wave of it here and there back on you. There was an officer down there who normally didn't work down there, but was always really opinionated about how much or how little we use physical force downtown. And he also was quite good at patting himself on the back for his fighting ability. Well, this same cop had been sent down to help us deal with this riot, like everybody was. And I'll never forget watching as the officer tried to deal with this young guy who was committing, some minor crime. And then I watched this guy basically pick that cop up and chuck him over the hood of a car. And of course, professionally, this is not acceptable. And if, I was closer, I would have grabbed the guy and hooked him up for the cop. But it did give this particular officer some pretty good firsthand experience of what we dealt with down there on a nightly basis. And I never heard a further comment from him again after that either. A number of cops down there sustained bumps and bruises, some scrapes, things of that nature. But like I said, none of the cops were seriously injured that night, thank goodness. There's an incident where an officer was fighting with another person and their gun came out of the holster and went sliding across the sidewalk like something you'd see out of a movie. I didn't see it personally, but I heard the story later and I still just laugh when I hear about it. Luckily, a bystander who was cop friendly, which there wasn't many down there, but was cop friendly, grabbed it, retrieved it, and got that to another officer. So thank goodness, no harm, no foul there. I try to remember what I was feeling during those few hours of dealing with this large crowd and people doing all these things they shouldn't be doing. And I don't know that I would say I was ever afraid. Maybe I should have been, but there was definitely a concern in knowing that we were so far outnumbered and you just never knew where something was going to come from that could hurt you. I remember worrying about my peers and hoping that we were going to get out of this in one piece that night. And I remember being angry. I was angry at these people who were destroying things and attacking people and causing all this grief. I was angry watching the business owners and the managers trying to deal with the damage and the loss of business. And I was angry because I couldn't do more to stop all this chaos. Unlike any other incident that I dealt with in my career, I observed a true crowd think or a group think in action, whatever you want to call it. It's amazing to watch who would normally be law-abiding, normal, respectful people devolve into rioters. They allow themselves to get caught up in the moment, and the next thing you know, they're yelling and taunting the police or throwing that rock or breaking that window or just running silly here and there instead of doing what a mature adult would do, is leave. The other reason people act like this is the anonymity. There's kind of an excitement, I guess, or a deep-seated desire to do something bad if everybody else is, and here's your chance to do it and more than likely get away with it. And then the last group, there's those people that will take advantage of any opportunity to destroy or damage or hurt someone or steal things just because, quite frankly, they're not good people. We did regain control down there, and it was inevitable, and we were able to make people leave, or it was so late that they just left on their own, or they got arrested. It was a big mess to clean up, but our city public works department and people like them did a fantastic job, as they always did, and had it all cleaned up by the next morning. The business owners down there had all of their messes cleaned up and the place boarded up as best they could. And I believe we ended up with, 25, 35 arrests. I don't recall now. And most of those are for minor charges, so the majority of those people were released the next day after they had their IA with the judge, initial appearance with the judge. I look back now and I think about that whole event, why it started, why it escalated to the point that it did, why certain things happened. And for our riot, I believe there are a number of causes. It's that constant struggle between the police and the youthful crowds, the youthful, often drunk and intoxicated crowds. They just finally hit a boiling point down there. And as the case now, cops aren't generally liked to begin with, especially by those that we have to deal with the most. The mix and the clash of culture, I believe, factored in as well. We had young people down there from various affluent areas in the Phoenix area, and then we had people down there from some very poor areas. And one of the things that we're confident of is that we know we had a number of different gang factions on Mill Avenue, and that night was no different. The fight that initiated this entire mess, we're pretty confident was caused at least in part by the involvement of some gang members and or different gang members clashing, throwing some signs, whatever happened. We also had a number of people there from a couple of special events that were occurring either downtown or nearby. There had been a big home college football game that evening, as well as another special event on the north end of Mill Avenue during the daytime. So this just added to the population and the density of all these folks. Well, I question if there's anything that we could have done better or been better prepared to deal with in the aftermath. Better prepared? Definitely. Now, we learned from this instance, and it came into play in a few situations since then for the police department in the city. I don't know that I can say we could have done anything better, given the majority of that evening is reactionary, as most of law enforcement is anyway. It's reactionary. Leading up to the incident, again, as I said, we knew that there were some rumblings that we were seeing, and we knew that the pressure was building, but short of closing the weekends down, I don't know what else we could have done. As I stated, there were numerous physical altercations between the police and these people that were causing trouble down there, as well as, unfortunately, bystanders that get caught in the middle. Which is why the police struggle and really attempt to explain that everybody needs to leave when that call's been made, when that unlawful assembly's been announced. I remember just being so frustrated when we'd be yelling at people to leave and they kept saying, "Oh, I'm not doing anything," or, "I have to go this way to get to my parked car." They just don't understand how dangerous it can be for them to be there, or how much additional work that they're placing on the police who are trying to just regain control and keep the peace. The end result of our incident wasn't bad in the big scheme of things. As stated, there's property damage. We had a damaged patrol car and damaged ambulance. We had some injuries, but we didn't have any serious injuries or death, and we didn't have any looting or fires taking place in the scale that it is now. And I will say that fires, that's what's scary. We had a few small ones that people tried to start that we got put out pretty quick, but not these huge structure fires that these people are seeing in these jurisdictions now. So I'll say again, while our riot was similar in a number of ways, it was nothing comparative to what's going on now. Well, back to current events. I've had a number of people, friends and family, who've asked what I feel, how I feel about what's going on. And like everyone, I do have opinions, some of them strong opinions, but I'm also a little reluctant to voice these because, quite frankly, it doesn't do any good. And as I stated in the beginning, and as I've always tried to hold to, I try to keep the viewpoints and the information that I give on the podcast directly relevant to what an officer would be thinking or used to think or thinks now. I think if you pay attention to and listen to the people out there who have just common sense and a moralistic viewpoint, you're going to hear rational and common sense thoughts. I also tried to remind people that while we may be seeing riots and vandalism and inappropriate behavior by, in some cases, thousands of people, there are hundreds of millions of Americans who don't feel the same way and don't believe that that's right. It is the squeaky wheel that gets the grease, and I believe this is another situation where the loud and demanding minority is getting more attention than the quiet majority. And I'll withhold my thoughts on the news media, politicians, celebrities, and others who either live in their alternate reality and or blindly support destructive groups and viewpoints. I could do a whole podcast on that. There are problems within law enforcement, no question. But the vast majority, 99% of these cops today are good cops who are just trying to do the best they can so they can go home at the end of their shift. As is the case with the criminal element in the population, A small percentage of wrongdoers or criminals creates a disproportionate impact on society than those that are not committing crimes or are the good cops. Cops know that we can't label all of society as criminals any more than society should label all cops as dirty or bad. There are literally thousands of confrontational incidents that occur every single day in our country between law enforcement and those people that we have to deal with. And there's such a tiny percentage that are ever considered excessive and or rise to the level of being criminal. I also find it sad that law enforcement always gets the broad brush treatment whenever we have an incident involving police misconduct or a criminal act. When a doctor commits a crime and somebody dies, not every doctor is vilified. When a sports figure cheats, not all sports figures are vilified. When a celebrity does something stupid or commits a crime, because that's pretty rare, instead of vilifying the entire entertainment industry, you get just the opposite. You get people falling over themselves, offering support and justification and excuses and I love you and we love you. I mean, think about it. Our society values and supports fame and celebrity far more than the people who are dedicated to keeping them safe. When I was planning the podcast, I started to go into this whole disband the police department push, but I just got to pass on that. Do I believe there are racist police officers in the country? Sure, absolutely. Just like there are racists in every profession and every walk of life, and all colors. You don't just have to be a white person to be racist. Black people can be racist, Hispanics, Asian, whatever. It just means you don't like other people of a different color than you. And we like to think and hold to a higher standard our law enforcement professionals across the country. I have no problem with this. I believe the police department should hold themselves to a higher standard. I do believe there are parts of the country where this type of behavior, and I'm not sure if tolerated is the correct word, but the behavior is not dealt with appropriately. And yes, I am a white guy, and I will concede that there are things that I have not and will not experience compared to other people. Just as I know that those who have never worked in law enforcement will never understand the complexity of what that is like either. So let's look at this from a cop's perspective. One, the vast majority of them are not happy and that they have to deal with these riots and looting and vandalism and fires and in some cases being shot at, hit, injured, and or killed. Their families are not okay or fine with any of this either. This is dangerous work, and in many cases, these officers have never seen anything like this in their career. It's not a good feeling to be out standing on the line or trying to intervene in a crime and having people yelling F you and flipping you off and all this other crap when you know that you are outnumbered by 100 to 1 or worse. And as if that isn't enough, how about all the people with their cameras, their phone cameras, etc., who are just waiting? They're just waiting for that perfect moment to capture that second of overreaction during your fifth 12-hour shift that week where you lose your patience or you just get caught up in a bad moment. I challenge anyone to do that job and not have an overreaction at some point. It's almost impossible. We used to run civilians through a firearms simulation system at the police department, especially people that were very critical of either a specific use of force incident or just the police in general. Few people accepted our invitation, but the ones that did and went through a couple scenarios, they always overreacted. They ended up shooting people that they shouldn't. They did things they shouldn't do. They said, I would do this to that person. We'd say, well, that's illegal. You can't do that. There's even a couple that started to cry because it was kind of such an emotional dump on them as they were doing the problem, and then they would realize that they really screwed up. I guess that walk a mile in their shoes is what I'm shooting for here. Then the vast majority of the critics on things like this have not and never will. I often comment that if the general public was aware of just how expensive, both monetarily and in equipment costs, dealing with something like this is, there'd be much more resistance to allowing it to continue. These massive mobilizations of manpower and equipment cost cities millions and millions of dollars in addition to their regular budgets. And think about it, those are funds and monies that could be used so much better elsewhere. So looking at this current wave of protests and issues that we have, I get it. I don't think there's any argument, at least that I haven't seen, from the law enforcement community that this incident with this man being killed is justified and that those guys shouldn't be held accountable, those cops. As with most police use of force incidents anymore, I don't watch them, I don't get involved, and I don't give opinions unless I'm asked or if it just happens to be part of work that I'm doing for a litigant. Do cops and will cops put their knees and hands and elbows and head on people's backs, necks, shoulders, legs as they're fighting to take control of them? Yeah, it's not going to stop. As with any use of force technique, from simple handcuffing up to firing your weapon at someone, there's the application of the force, which then needs to decrease and or stop once control has been gained or the objective has been reached. Unlike the movies and TV and everything else, fights are not clean, they're not easy, they're scary, they're unpredictable, and they're dangerous. And until we find a better way to immobilize or control people who do not comply with direction, cops are going to physically have to fight suspects, period. Now again, this specific incident with the knee on the neck thing, once they had control of this guy, I don't understand why that stayed the way it was. That should have stopped. But again, don't want to comment too much on it because I'm just not aware of it. I know that this also has touched a racism issue and that he was treated this way because he is a black guy. And that could be the case. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. It's still a terrible thing to happen. But my belief is this cop probably treated any suspect that he fought with like this. This time it just happened to be a black guy who also happened to die. And then if this was the case, if this was a white guy that died instead, I wonder what the result would be right now. I mean, would the country be in an uproar? I don't think so, but it's interesting to think about. And the bottom line is, regardless, I think the reaction and the fallout to this incident was bound to occur, whether it was this incident or something else. It just needed this final trigger with this event, with this George Floyd guy. I'm sure you have noticed, as I have, a huge uptick in social media postings with regard to all this that's going on. I do read and watch a few of them, but most I don't. I haven't posted anything. I haven't liked or disliked anything. I haven't really made a social media footprint at all, and I'm pretty sure I won't. No one's going to change their opinion on these issues that we're dealing with based on a Facebook post or a Twitter comment. If you think one way going into it, you're pretty confident that you're not going to change that viewpoint. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't or you can't. You're certainly free to do so. Post and video and whatever all you want. And maybe that's your way of venting. I just subscribe to that adage I heard from my grandfather at some point. Don't talk about things in a mixed company that are controversial. Like politics and religion and this. I believe if you truly want to make your mark or let people know where you stand, you do so with your wallet and your vote. With your vote, you vote in those that you believe will do a better job, and you vote out those who you believe are failing. If you live in an area where things have been crap for decades, get rid of those people that are running that area. With regard to your wallet, you spend your money in the direction of things that you feel should be supported, and you don't spend your money on the things you feel are bad. Examples being giving or not giving to political causes, shopping or not shopping at a business or a store, going or not going to a sporting event, and could go on and on. Peaceful protest is an acceptable way to deal with things. I think most people agree with that. Looting, vandalism, lighting fire to businesses and places in your own neighborhood, not so much. And then these people that are justifying criminal activity in reaction to the bigger issue, I don't get that at all. The adage, two wrongs don't make a right, rings true here. If you want to be part of a gathering, protest, group, or similar, where some are calling cops pigs, all cops are thugs and murderers, and justifying vandalism, that's your right. It's not right to me, but okay. During my time with the police department and since then, I've been privy to a lot of inside information on most of these current groups and organizations that are involved in this type of social issue. With very few exceptions, they are divisive, and I don't support or agree with their true views or goals. Something you need to look into before you throw yourself behind them. I heard that networks are canceling the show Cops and the newer variant of the same theme, that live PD show. I don't watch either one. I don't really watch most of the cop shows that are out. But I've always felt that reality cop shows such as Cops and Live PD did a good job of showing the reality of working the job. And I really hope that this overreaction, in my opinion, will be reversed. I'm not sure what it accomplishes. Speaking of accomplishing, one of the few videos that I did watch in part involved a guy addressing that exact issue. After he discusses all the looting and the rioting and the burning and the vandalizing, he asks, "What have you accomplished?" And he kind of repeats this a couple of times. It's a great question. I wish more people would contemplate this. These criminal acts do nothing but further polarize the American public away from supporting and or wanting to help improve the true problems, the root problems. I think until people begin to think for themselves, factor real statistics into their conclusions, and not rely on social media, news media, and friends and family to tell them what to think, this societal problem is not going to get much better. I hope it does. I truly hope it does. With that, I close another episode of I Barely Got Here. I thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and please help me push the podcast to other people that you think would enjoy it. If you have a question or a comment, shoot me an email at ibarelygothere@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow the podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Sam42 is 10-7.